Hi guys, we're going to try to talk about a topic that I know can become very heated very quickly, but one of my fellow campers posed a question about diversity in fiction and our thoughts about it. I'm going to be attempting to approach this in as sensitive and polite a manner as humanly possible. I'm going to attempt to stay off of my soapbox about certain things, and we will try to keep it nice and hopefully not cause too many rage quits. First thing I'm going to talk about is the three groups of people who tend to most commonly be described in these videos about diversity in fiction. And then I'm also going to talk about three other groups of people who don't tend to be touched on a lot when we talk about diversity in fiction, and I don't know why, but they seem to be neglected in these videos as well as in books and literature in general. So let's jump right in. Let's get this over as painlessly as possible because I know it can get ugly real quick, but we're gonna go ahead and talk about it because it's healthy to talk about things like sane, rational, adult human beings. Anyway, we're gonna jump into this. All right, bear with me. All right, first group we're gonna talk about are the three groups of people who are most commonly discussed in these videos about diversity in fiction. We're going to talk about ethnicity, we're gonna talk about sex, and we're gonna talk about gender. And yes, those last two are a different thing, but we're not gonna get into that. If you don't know the difference, then you can educate yourself. That's not my job. But anyway, this is a very common complaint that it seems like 9 out of 10 MCs in books are white heterosexual males, and that if you want to find an MC who doesn't fall into that category, it almost feels like you have to search for it. You're not just going to kind of run across it unless you get lucky. This trend, to me, seems like it's actually changed quite a bit in recent years, and we're having a lot more female MCs. But I have my own issues with that because they still tend to be predominantly white and predominantly straight, which is just kind of lame and boring. And statistically speaking, if there were this many heroes in the world, chances are more of them would be different genders and different sexual orientations and different ethnicities. Just statistically speaking, if we had all these heroes in like the real world, chances are you'd land on a lot more than we're doing for these different groups. So that's just one of my main issues is sheer believability of all these MCs being like heterosexual white people, whether it be male or female. That's my main complaint about that. I'm not going to get too much into these groups because, in all honesty, talking about these ones are done to death in other videos like this, and they are also ones that I very easily could get up on my soapbox about, and I don't want to do that because of reasons. But let me just kind of summarize that in that I think it's stupid that we treat people differently just because of whatever things that they don't have control over. And I think that's dumb. Okay, guys. The next thing we're going to talk about is the three groups of people that I don't see represented very much in fiction, and I also don't see represented very much in these videos about groups that aren't represented much in fiction. So what we're going to talk about is age, religion, and disabilities. Now, I want to start off with religion because this is the only one out of the 6 categories that we're going to talk about that people have a choice in, which I know might make a difference to some people as to whether or not this should be included in here because people choose what religion they have, but I think it's important. It's also one of the protected classes. Here in the US we have laws about discrimination, and this is one of the categories that falls into a protected class, and it is something that I have noticed is lacking in diversity in fiction. I have noticed that if they bring up religion at all, whether it be sci-fi, fantasy, contemporary, historical fiction, whatever, it seems like they represent it like the whole world either has only one religion and everybody agrees with that one religion, and there's only one branch of that religion too, which is weird because realistically, like, every religion in the world has multiple branches. Like, I can't think of one that doesn't, that's a major religion. I mean, even Buddhism has several. Sorry, I'm trying to like plug in my phone like covertly here because it was telling me I was running out of battery. But either there's only one religion in the entire world, or in the entire country, and everybody believes and agrees with it 100%, and there aren't different sects of that religion or anything, or there's like two main religions, either there being two main actual like religions, or one's a religion and the other is the anti-religion group, and they're always pitted against one another. And that's not realistic diversity of religion either. Like I mentioned, just about every major religion has a million different branches of it. I mean, oh gosh, look at Christianity. Like, it's just, oh, they're all over the place. No offense, but it is. Like, there's Catholicism, there's Protestants, there's non-denominational, there's, depending on your opinion as to whether or not this counts as Christianity, but they count themselves as Christians, so we're going to use them in the example. There's LDS, there's Seventh-day Adventists, there's all sorts of stuff. There's just ones whose names I can't even pronounce. And that's just Christianity, one of the major religions. So let's not even get into the nightmare that is all the other ones and their branches. Realistically, if you're going to have a large population in your fiction story, they're not all going to be one religion, and they're not all going to be two religions. And if they were all one religion by some crazy random happenstance, not everybody in the religion is going to believe or practice it or be in the same sect of that religion, even if they have the same core beliefs. So that's one of the main ones I wanted to talk about that I have not seen talked upon or talked on a lot in these videos. I did see that Jenna Moreci did mention that kind of briefly, but that was in a world building video, and I wanted to kind of bring it up because I think it's important for diversity's sake as well. All right, we're gonna move on next to age. All right, I'll be right back when we get to that. Okay, the next group we're gonna talk about that seems to be underrepresented by my observation within fiction, as well as these videos that talk about diversity in fiction, is age. From what I've seen and read a lot, especially within the main genres that I tend to stick to, I usually do fantasy and sci-fi, ones that are weird splices of the two. I've dabbled in some horror, I've dabbled in some thriller, and I've dabbled in just about everything else. But I tend to notice that we have got a very limited age range that our MCs tend to be in. Like, they don't usually tend to be much younger than about 16, if they are. Of course, I'm going to bar Harry Potter from this because that one kind of progresses through the ages. But in most books, they don't tend to go below 16 unless it's a children's book or a teen book. But anything above that in the books, they don't tend to talk about characters that are below that age unless it's to mention that they're like the MC's kid and that's their whole motivation for wanting to get out of the perilous situation they're in. That's pretty much their role that they're relegated to. And they don't tend to be over about 40, 45-ish typically. And I don't know why we don't do a large, like an older demographic. And if we do represent an older demographic, they tend to be cast in certain roles that aren't particularly flattering. Either they're ugly old people and they're bad because they're old and grouchy and stuff like that. They're an antagonist in that they're not necessarily evil, but they're set in their ways and they're hard-headed because they're old and can't learn anything new, which Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit on a rant on this one, sorry. From my observation, yes, that can sometimes be true of people. However, more often than not, I've noticed that people who are in an older age bracket don't have that problem because they've realized through age and experience that things change over time and that one needs to adapt. And they've done so. So I think that's a silly thing to always cast somebody in just because they're older. You think they're set in their ways and can't learn new tricks. Anyway, that was my rant. I'm going to try to keep those to a minimum during this. The other role that they tend to get cast in if they are older is the Obi-Wan role. They are the mentor whose only purpose is to teach the main character just enough to get by, and then they get killed by somebody to act as the motivating factor for that MC to be the hero. And I think that's really limiting to do that with, just basically to relegate anybody who happens to be in that age group into those kind of lame roles. And I would like to see some more representation for that group. I think it would be easily done and could be done really well if we tried. And if we could just put ourselves in other people's shoes for a bit instead of just writing about young hot people because we have no imaginations. But anyway, we're gonna go on to the next group. The next and final group, but not least, is going to be on people with disabilities that tend to be precluded from fiction. So we're gonna move on to that next. I'll be right back. Okay, last group we're gonna talk about that I feel is underrepresented in fiction, as well as underrepresented in these YouTube videos that talk about diversity in fiction, is people with disabilities. This is something that I feel is more represented in movies and TV than it is in books. I feel like I very rarely run across a badass character who happens to be an amputee in a book, although we've got a movie coming out here very shortly with The Rock, who plays an amputee victim who is a total badass. And we also had a movie recently, Upgrade, which I won't give any spoilers because that one's really... Sorry, my dog is licking my toes. Stop. Which I was another representation of a really cool character who's having to cope with the disability that they recently had, as well as many other super stressful events and situations that are happening to them at the time. I don't want to spoil things because that movie was awesome. I loved it so much. It's super violent though, so I would not recommend taking your children to that one. It is like really gruesome in some parts. But I feel like we represent people with disabilities, and I'm not talking about like mental illnesses, because I feel like those are talked about a lot in fiction. That's not to be confused with that they're talked about well, or that they're accurately represented, but they are talked about a lot. I'm talking more about, we don't typically see MCs that are in a wheelchair, or like I mentioned earlier, somebody with an amputated limb, or somebody who has a severe mental handicap. We don't tend to see those a lot, and I think that's kind of silly. I think it's writers being lazy, and they don't want to have to think how a MC would handle the same kind of situation as somebody who didn't have this problem that they have to cope with. They don't want to have to think of a more creative solution to the same kind of problems that somebody who maybe like is in a wheelchair would have to figure out how to do in this situation, because they can't get over a certain obstacle or something as easily as somebody who had full use of their limbs. That's just... And I think it would make for more interesting scenarios if you had these extra obstacles in the way of your MC. It would really make for some really powerful, strong, cool characters that are badass if they still get through these despite these factors that are working against them and making it more difficult. And I really do think that if you thought hard enough, you could write really cool characters like this, and it would make for awesome plot points and stuff, and make for different kind of stories that you can't tell otherwise unless you include those things. So that's pretty much it on that subject. I could go on rants like this forever. In fact, the first couple times I tried to record this, I did, but I'm gonna spare you because it's just not nice to subject you to my raving lunatic rants. So I'm going to let you go for now. If I have been offensive or hurtful to anybody, that was not my intention, and I certainly hope that you can forgive me. And please let me know if I was insensitive or hurtful in some way that I am not realizing. I would like to know so that I can avoid that in the future, and so that we can all get along and basically be just friends. Let's be friends, all of us, and enjoy all our differences, because it makes the world colorful and interesting. And if we were all the same, it would be boring as hell. Anyway, I'm gonna let you go for now, and you guys have a great one. All right, bye.